Hello everyone, I'm Preston Campbell and it's an honor to join you today, and I want to thank you for allowing myself and Dr. Marshall to join you today via video conference and for inviting Alex Ebert to be there in person. Also want to thank Christine for inviting us. We've known her for quite some time, and it sounds like a lot of wonderful things are going on within your group. We join with you in your mission to improve the lives of those with cystic fibrosis, and it makes sense to me that possibly the first thing that we work on together is a registry for your people with CF, and certainly Dr. Marshall and Alex are the perfect people to help you with that. But we look forward to working with you on many collaborations in the future. So thank you for the great work that you're doing there. And we look forward to working with you as we go forward. So I want to just give you an introductory comments about where we think we are and where we're going in cystic fibrosis. Hopefully it'll be encouraging to you. I think that the CF story is the most amazing story in medicine today. And the reason I say that, if you go back to 1955, most children with cystic fibrosis did not live long enough to go to school. That meant their median survival was about 5 years of age. Worse than that, there weren't any CF medicines, there weren't any CF doctors, there weren't any CF clinics, there wasn't any CF science, and there certainly wasn't any hope. A dedicated group of parents formed the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and today the median survival in the United States is over 40 years of age. Half of our patients are adults. There have been 9 therapies that specifically treat cystic fibrosis that are FDA approved. And 2 of those therapies address the basic defect, treating almost 60% of our population. So that begs the question, how did that possibly happen? Well, I think there are a couple of things. The early investments were critical. We started in 1960 by setting up a care center network that provided multidisciplinary care to people with CF, and Dr. Marshall may talk a little bit more about that. And then we started the patient registry to track how we're doing and to use data to inform future discussions. And then investments in science paid off. In 1980, we committed $10 million when we had $400,000 in the bank to 10 research development programs across the country to begin to unravel the science. And the CF defect was identified 5 years later in 1985, and 4 years after that, the CF gene was identified, which really opened up the door for everything that we know now about cystic fibrosis, including the CF protein. And that became a target in the 1990s. But industry wasn't focused on this emerging science. And so my predecessor, Bob Bell, had the wisdom to start a program which we called the Therapeutics Development Program, which collaborated with industry to try to bring them into the arena of cystic fibrosis to focus their efforts with us on these therapies that could change CF forever. So the Therapeutics Development Program was started in 1998. It was created to encourage industry to focus on CF, and specifically the CF protein CFTR as a drug target. And it was a very simple program. Basically, it had 3 components. One was we offered money. We lowered the bar for people to come into the field of cystic fibrosis. In addition to that, we provided research tools such as cells, antibodies, discovery tools, assays, and more importantly, we had scientific advisors that would join their team, so there was a real collaboration to make sure that when we needed to turn right, we turned right and we didn't turn left. And then finally, anticipating success, a very robust clinical trials network, which now has 82 sites, was established to make sure that we safely and effectively were able to perform the anticipated clinical trials. And indeed, this did pay off. That was in 1998. In 2012, the FDA approved the first therapy that treated the basic defect, CFTR, in cystic fibrosis when they approved ivacaftor, also known as Kalydeco, initially for people with a single mutation, G5551D. And to show you a little bit about why that was such a transformative therapy, I want to show you the next two slides. This is the lung function data from that trial, demonstrating that there was an absolute improvement in lung function at 10 percentage points, a relative improvement of 15 percentage points, but it went well beyond their improvement in their ability to breathe. They gained rather significant amounts of weight. They felt incredible. They felt much better. We know that 40% of them lost chronic colonization with Pseudomonas. The abnormalities in their intestines with pH was normalized. And the number of times that they required antibiotics or admission to the hospital for pulmonary exacerbations was essentially cut in half. So this is a really phenomenal breakthrough treatment for people with cystic fibrosis. And it's been around long enough now that even more importantly, we know that if you look at the slope of decline in that same population before ivacaftor, in the red, you can see that an individual with CF would begin to need to think about a lung transplant in their mid-40s when they've reached a FEV1 or a lung function percentile of 25 to 30%. They would really need to be on the list for a lung transplant. In contrast, with these new therapies, when started early, at that same age, they would have an FEV1 of 60%, which is essentially, you're able to have normal function at 60%. And their median survival would be in the 70s and 80s if you extended that slope out to where they would need to have a lung transplant. So these are truly transformational benefits, but it was only 4%, then it was 8%. Fortunately, in 2015, another drug, or Combi, was approved, which treats the most common CF mutation, F508del. 50% of our patients have 2 copies of that mutation, or they're homozygous for that mutation. And so this drug was for them, bringing the treated population to 58%. The benefits of this treatment were not as great as they were for Kalydeco and G551D, but they were still quite remarkable. But because they weren't so great, we also 6 years earlier began another screening program to raise the level of efficacy and to move us to an even higher percentage of patients treated. And this graph shows that data. If you look at the ivacaftor story on the left, untreated, they essentially have no CFTR function at all. When treated with ivacaftor, they flip a switch and their CFTR function goes from 0% to essentially 50%, with very remarkable, as I mentioned earlier, clinical benefits. With VX-809 and ivacaftor together, which is the drug Orkambi, which I mentioned earlier, you get to approximately 30%. As I said earlier, not as good as ivacaftor alone. With this new screening program, one of the options is to add a second corrector, which is shown in the last bar graph, where now you get to 60% of CFTR restoration for those with 2 copies of F508del, a level that's even higher than those with G551D experience when placed on ivacaftor originally. That would mean that 95% of people with CF would now have treatments for the basic defect, because we'd be able to treat patients that not only had an ivacaftor responsive mutation, were homozygous for F508del, but we'd also be able to treat the 30% of patients who had only a single copy of F508del. That leaves you with this pie chart where 95% are receiving these transformational therapies and 5% haven't yet benefited. And so what is in this last 5%? The last 5% comprises 3% of the 5% is patients with nonsense mutations or premature stop mutations. And I will just tell you that we not unexpectedly, we have done a lot of investments in this space. We've committed $40 million, and we have 6 ongoing programs to bring new therapies to those patients. The last 2% is difficult because we're going to have to bypass the genetic defect because it's somewhat scrambled with frame shifts or something. And so it'll take messenger RNA or DNA therapies, which we're also investing in. But our goal is to get to 100%. We do not want to leave any patients behind. So as we look forward, we can see a day where 100% of our patients will have these transformative therapies, and if started early enough, and we have newborn screening in the United States, started early enough, they would be able to benefit and would have a survival in the 70s and 80s, or essentially a normal lifespan on these therapies. And so we're quite excited about that. But these therapies are quite expensive. It's a problem to have to take therapies, even if all you have to take is a pill twice a day or once a day, which we hope is where we go. It's still a problem to do that. We don't want individuals who go to university to forget to take their medicines and never have a CF phenotype or any evidence of cystic fibrosis to then become pancreatic insufficient, develop lung disease, and have to try to rescue them because they forgot to take their medicine. So it begs the question that's shown on this slide, is there a better way? How would you cure cystic fibrosis? In order to cure cystic fibrosis, you would need to treat the underlying defect, which is the abnormal gene. And so how do you possibly do that? Well, thankfully, the most exciting science today is gene editing, where you actually go in and you repair a mutation or a defect in a gene and make it normal. How does that work? Let me show you this video, and then I'll end with just a comment on that.
In cystic fibrosis, thick, sticky mucus presses down on cilia inside the lungs, preventing the cilia from beating and clearing the mucus. The cause of this problem is an abnormal CFTR protein created from genetic mutations inside the cell nucleus. Our goal is to replace and repair the abnormal DNA sequence to create a functional protein and restore normal mucus. One way to do this is to use gene editing technologies that cut out and replace defective parts of DNA, such as CRISPR-Cas9. The CRISPR-Cas9 repair system has 3 components: a guide RNA that seeks out and binds to a specific location in the DNA, the Cas9 nuclease enzyme, a type of molecular scissors that cuts the genetic sequence at the precise binding site, and a repair template containing the correct genetic sequence for the gene. Once these 3 components are introduced into the cell, the guide RNA binds to and activates the Cas9 nuclease. Now, the Cas9 nuclease, the molecular scissors, can search the cell's DNA for potential targets. At a potential target site, like the one shown here, Cas9 unwinds a section of DNA to see if the guide RNA sequence matches. If the DNA sequence matches the guide RNA, the Cas9 nuclease cuts the DNA to create a break in the strands. To replace the mutation with a normal sequence, a repair process is used that precisely edits the DNA. For this editing process to work, a short piece of DNA template that contains the desired normal gene sequence is introduced into the cell. The cell uses this fragment as a template and copies the new sequence as it repairs the broken DNA. Once the first strand has been repaired, the template falls away, and the other strand of DNA uses the repaired strand to fill in the remaining gap, leaving both strands with the corrected gene sequence. The cell then uses the corrected DNA strand to produce a functional CFTR protein that allows the proper flow of salt and fluids through the cell membrane. Mucus returns to normal within the lung, allowing the cilia to beat freely and clear the lungs of germs and irritants.
I hope that you loved that video. I love it. And if you want to find that video and a lot of other information, go on our website, cff.org. Go to the North American meeting 2016. Look at the plenaries if you don't look at anything else. And this information and much more will be embedded in those plenaries for you to use. But with gene editing and the ability, as you saw, to actually correct the abnormal gene and normalize it, our hope, and this is going to take time, 20 years or more, our hope is that an individual goes into clinic for treatment with CF and then they leave without CF. And that's our dream. And as crazy as that may sound, let me just remind you that they all thought we were crazy when we started high throughput screening to identify ivacaftor or Combi and these other treatments that we think are going to enable people to live into their 70s and 80s going forward. We have a great story behind us. I think the story before us is even better. One of the secret sauces of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is collaboration. We look forward to collaborating with you. Alex is there. I think that you'll find that he is the expert for the registry, but hopefully there'll be other times, and we actually hope that we get a chance to see you at our meeting in Indianapolis next year, the North American meeting. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. We look forward to making a difference in the lives of people with CF together. Thank you all very much.
So you've heard from Preston Campbell about the exciting research advances. And now I'm going to spend some time talking about the clinical activities of the foundation, starting with this diagram of the way we're organized into what we refer to as strategic pillars. The first pillar that Preston talked about is accelerating research and drug development. The second pillar is defining and enabling high-quality specialized care. The third, to ensure patients have access to that care. And the fourth, to engage and enable people with CF to lead full and productive lives. I'm going to focus on this second strategic pillar in my comments. First of all, I want to go over the key components of our care model. And it starts with our care center network. We have 120 pediatric programs, 110 adult programs, and 50 affiliates across the U.S. And the care model is organized like this. We're in support there at the bottom of this slide. We have a peer review committee that we call our center committee. They conduct site visits on our behalf to all the centers around the country. And then care centers caring for those stick figures, which represent people with CF. You can see the care centers, different sizes, different shapes, all influenced by the context of their institutions, but with explicit standards for multidisciplinary care, properly credentialed physician leadership, and then peer oversight by their peers from around the country. We also bring multidisciplinary groups together, including typically an adult with CF and a parent of a child with CF, to develop clinical practice guidelines. And we use rigorous methodology such that we can publish these in peer-reviewed journals, and they're accessible to anyone from around the world. We've also had a long-standing registry in our CF community in the U.S. Here are the cover shots of some of the annual reports. The first one back to 1969. I think the registry was started even earlier than that. This is the earliest report I could put my hands on to take a photo. And then every year we produce these annual reports. But the registry is really one of the foundation's crown jewels, and we use it for many purposes. I've pointed out the annual reports where we track the progress on the disease. We also use it to test promising new therapies, the outcomes of those therapies in post-marketing. We use it for quality improvement. We use it for comparative effectiveness research. And as I'll get to later in the talk, we're now trying to bring the registry data to point of care to try to improve decision making. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've used the registry and registry data for post-marketing surveillance studies. You've already heard from Preston about the transformational therapies, one of them being Kalydeco. It was approved for use in the US by the FDA in early 2012. And it's been a game-changing therapy, and I'll show you some of the research that we've done using the registry to show that efficacy in clinical trials has translated into effectiveness in real world in clinical practice. So I'll talk a little bit about uptake of the drug, which was unbelievable. Within the first year, over 80% of eligible patients were on the drug. Talk a little bit about the observational safety study that's ongoing, the effectiveness, again, in this real-world setting of clinical practice, and then rate of decline. So on the right, you can see, and this has been presented at the North American Conference, you can find it in the abstract book, and now this is moving towards publication. In the right-hand column, you can see the results from the phase 3 study led by Bonnie Ramsey, and it shows the impact of ivacaftor on pulmonary function, FEV1 % predicted, reduction in those with one or greater number of pulmonary exacerbations, and on weight. And you can see those improvements, plus 10.2%, 44%, and 2.7 kilograms. And then you can see what was presented at the North American Conference from the registry data by Fink et al., the same metrics lined up in a way to try to mirror what was done in the phase 3 study. And you can see still a tremendous impact of this drug in clinical practice. We're conducting, in collaboration with Vertex, more in-depth effectiveness and safety study, and I'll show those results in just a couple slides. But first, let me talk a little bit about rate of decline. And when we think about new therapies and their potential impact on disease progression, here you can see on the y-axis % predicted FEV1 and patient age in years. And therapies can increase FEV1 without changing rate of decline, and you can see the impact on patients with this red line. They can show an improvement in rate of decline and the impact that that has. And in the blue line, both increasing FEV1 and slowing rate of decline. And when you get that combination, you can see the profound impact that a therapy can have. And so thus the tremendous interest in rate of decline. And this work has been published in the Blue Journal by Sawicki et al., using a registry comparator group to those in open label ivacaftor treatment group. You can see that there's been a reduction in rate of decline in the ivacaftor related treated group, and these are G551D patients here. So in summary, when you look at collectively the post-approval research work that's available now, what's turned up is no new safety signals, which is a really important finding, evidence of effectiveness with the impact on FEV1, pulmonary exacerbations, and weight, very similar to what's been shown in phase 3 clinical trials, and a decrease in rate in FEV1 decline as compared to a registry comparator group. And that Vertex CFF collaboration that I mentioned to you, it's showing a reduction in mortality, reduction in need for transplant, and other important impacts from this drug. There's also been studies with the UK CF registry, and so this will be coming out in the literature over the next year or two. So the other area that I want to talk about is quality improvement, and the registry feeds directly into quality improvement by way of data feedback to the care centers. In the lower half of this slide, I'm showing you metrics on median BMI percentile in those 2 to 20 years of age. The graph to the left, there's 120 individual bars there representing all the pediatric programs across the country. And then you can see that one red bar is the center receiving this report showing where they stand vis-a-vis all their peers across the US. And then that graph to the right shows in green, the lower line, that's the national average. The blue line are the top 10 care centers. And the red line is this particular center depicted in the left, and you can see on this metric, they've been working on this particular aspect of care, improving nutritional care. You can see that they've improved their outcomes over this few-year time period. We've published a lot of this work in the BMJ Quality and Safety Supplement a couple years ago. I'd encourage you to look at this. All the articles are open access. If you Google BMJ Quality and Safety Supplements, this is the last supplement that they've published, and all the articles in there are freely available. So I want you to think a little bit about the way we're trying to drive quality of care. And this is just showing a bell-shaped curve, quality of care on the x-axis and number of care centers on the y-axis. And what you'd expect in any sort of complex phenomenon like quality of care, or however we judge quality of care, you'd expect a bell-shaped curve. And we're approaching this quality of care from the standpoint of the center committee oversight, looking at the explicit standards that we've laid out, is at that lower end of the quality curve. Are the centers achieving those standards? Are they, you might say, are they good enough? They do more than that, but this is one way to think about it. And with quality improvement, we're actually working at the other end of this bell-shaped curve. We're looking at, there are some high performers in that upper portion of the bell-shaped curve. We want to drive everyone in the middle of that curve up towards those higher performing metrics on quality of care. I'm not going to go through our entire improvement journey. It dates back to the late 90s when Jerry O'Connor and Hebe Quinton first looked at our registry data at the center level and exposed the tremendous variation across the care center network. But I will point out a couple key milestones that I want to make you aware of. And first and foremost is we developed a strategic plan. And any important initiative, of course, you need a roadmap, and that's what we developed in concert with experts in quality improvement and leaders in the CF community, as well as the CFF leadership. And what came out of that meeting where we convened all of those stakeholders was what we referred to as an opportunity statement. And it included an assertion that years of life could be added just using currently available therapies and approaches to care, a vision for exemplary care at all of our care centers across the country, key strategies, and worthy goals. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I thought you might be interested in reading these 7 worthy goals that came out of that strategic planning meeting. And I'll highlight just a couple of these goals. First was to make people with CF and their families full partners with the care team. And this is one that we're revisiting now in the care model of the future, so I'll come back to this. And then another one that I'll highlight is to support all transplantation and end-of-life care decisions. And this is an initiative really that we've just launched in the last couple years, where we've done RFAs, trying to bring palliative care specialists to our community and palliative care research. And now we're just in the midst of launching a lung transplantation initiative. You'll hear more about that. So really what we're trying to do at our care centers is change the culture to one of getting the work done, getting the clinical work done, and improving it. So on the left box you see professional knowledge, and we know that all of our multidisciplinary team members, physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, social workers, dietitians, always trying to stay up to date in their medical knowledge and in their skills and bring the right values and ethics to this work. And what we're trying to add in is improvement knowledge, systems thinking, process mapping, understanding variation and measurement, and a scientific approach to making improvements. And there's also a human psychology component here. And bringing those all together to really increase the value that we deliver to people with CF. Another thing in that improvement journey that I want to spend just a few minutes on is our benchmarking work. And people use benchmark primarily as a noun. What's the benchmark? What should we be trying to achieve? And I'm using benchmarking as a verb. In other words, identifying the high performers and then going there and trying to find out how did they achieve those results, and then share those ideas across the care center network. Or what's shown here, basically visiting those high-performing sites to discover the secret sauce. So there's an article in that supplement that I pointed out to you about benchmarking. I encourage you to read that. These were some of the key themes that emerged from that work. And interestingly enough, it wasn't all about the technical delivery of care. There were some other very important themes that emerged, that these were highly functional teams and effective leadership. And their practice style was not one of take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. This was a proactive style. They didn't let little problems become big problems. There was a consistency in their core care processes that they sought, and they used different methodologies to achieve this, but that was at all of these centers. The care teams had high expectations of themselves and high expectations of their patients and families, and they really engaged their patients and families, and they spent time on informing them on disease management and the underlying rationale, and that was really sort of a safety net. Patients and families knew what to expect, and when they weren't getting it, they made a call to the care center staff. Final point, that it's not just about the physician, it's not just about the nurse, it's everybody on the team. And this is one of my favorite anecdotes. This is a lovely woman, and she worked at the University of Massachusetts in Worcester, Massachusetts, as the administrative assistant. They didn't use voicemails. So when patients and families had an issue, they called and they got this woman a live voice. And she took their concerns very seriously, and the nurses and the physicians at the care center were in close proximity to this woman. She would go and track them down, and she would beat on them until they responded, basically. And she had another name that was related to the benchmarking team, she who must be obeyed. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that there was no question that she was contributing to those outstanding outcomes at this care center. It wasn't just the doc, not just the nurse, it was the entire team. So just a few comments on how have we been able to sustain this culture of improvement, this QI initiative that we launched a number of years ago. Well, we used every lever at our disposal. We highlighted it at the North American CF conference, in symposia, workshops, and even a few plenaries. We issued requests for applications to stimulate quality improvement and innovation. We integrated it into our accreditation process, into our site visits, our annual progress reports. The Care Center Committee instituted a Quality Care Award. This is peer recognition that proved to be very important. And we gave it out at the North American CF Conference, at the Center Directors Business Meeting. And this became a big deal in our community. You know, we took pictures, we announced it at the plenary session. And so it was great recognition for those care teams that won the award, and it was also modeling to all the other care teams, this is what we're recognizing, so that they got on board with the Quality Improvement Initiative. So it's had some impact, and this is a metric showing on the y-axis a measure of pulmonary function, FEV1 percent predicted. On the x-axis, BMI percentile, a measure of nutritional status. Each dot representing one care center and showing just pediatric data for patients 6 to 17 years of age. This is the data from 2002. And then here's the same presentation, data in 2012, and you can see the migration of dots into that right upper quadrant, better pulmonary function and plump CF patients. That's what we want to see. Those are main drivers of quality of life and survival. So a little bit about where are we going, the care model of the future. And I don't have a lot of time to get into detail, but I'll just highlight a few points of where we're going now. And first off is to try to build a broader set of metrics. The registry data, the health outcomes, obviously very important, but now we're in the midst of deploying an experience of care survey across the country. I'm really excited about that. I think that's going to complement the medical outcomes. We want to start to get at health-related quality of life and then healthcare utilization and cost to really get a balanced set of metrics. We want to use data, and particularly the registry data and technology at point of care to support decision making at point of care. We're in the midst of 2 or 3 pilots to try to accomplish this, and I'm really excited about that as well. Back to that worthy goal that I pointed out earlier, we're back to really fundamentally understanding how important this partnership between care teams and people with CF and their families, how important that is if we're really going to help them sustain that rigorous daily care regimen. So we're really after this partnership and promoting that heavily. And then really trying to get at more holistic care and encompassing mental and emotional health. We had a plenary on this a couple years ago. There is no health without mental health, and we're really promoting that and encouraging that across our care center network. I'll close with just this slide from Brent James, my mentor in quality improvement in Salt Lake City when I was at the University of Utah. He wrote an article in the BMJ Quality and Safety Journal talking about the CF improvement story, and I've pulled out just a few sentences from that article. He says, "Some have estimated that we could achieve as much benefit for patients if we could routinely apply and deliver current best medical knowledge as will be achieved by the next 25 years of government funding for new biomedical research. Obviously, the healing profession should vigorously pursue both courses, new biomedical research and care delivery science, as has been done in CF." Then he closed with really a charge to us and to you. It represents a massive opportunity for clinical scientists and the patients that we serve. So hopefully you take that message to heart. So thank you for your attention, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to present our story on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and then close with these many acknowledgments to our work. So thank you.